A hidden affair comes back to haunt a wealthy couple when a devastating secret about the wife's past surfaces, threatening everything they hold dear. And if you cherish your family and love videos like this, subscribe to our channel to have 10 years of luck in your life. The Miami skyline glittered against the night sky as Andrew and Claire Sullivan hosted their company's success party at the Grand Marina Hotel's penthouse suite. Their tech startup, Sullivan Innovations, had just secured its first major round of funding, $50 million from top-tier investors. The couple had spent 3 years building their company from scratch, and tonight marked their arrival in Miami's elite business circle. Andrew stood at the center of the room in his tailored navy suit, commanding attention as he discussed expansion plans with a group of investors. His confident demeanor and articulate explanations made it clear why he excelled at securing partnerships. Claire moved through the crowd in her black designer dress, ensuring every guest felt welcomed. Together, they presented the perfect image of success: young, ambitious, and unstoppable. The event planner had transformed the space into a modern showcase. Steel and glass surfaces reflected the warm lighting, while minimalist flower arrangements added subtle elegance. Waiters circulated with champagne and carefully curated hors d'oeuvres. A string quartet played contemporary arrangements, providing sophisticated background music without overwhelming conversation. Between conversations with guests, Claire caught glimpses of Andrew and felt a surge of pride. At 32, they had achieved what many people spent decades working toward. Their penthouse apartment, luxury cars, and now this successful company. Everything pointed to a perfect life. Yet in quiet moments like this, when the facade didn't require her full attention, unwanted memories surfaced. Later that evening, after the last guest departed, Claire stood alone on the penthouse balcony. The cool night air provided relief from the evening's social performance. Her mind drifted to her childhood home in Connecticut, to the sprawling estate where she'd spent her formative years. She remembered the gardens where Jamal had worked before becoming their butler. He'd been different from the other staff, younger, more passionate about art and literature. Their conversations had started innocently enough, discussing books and paintings during his breaks. The memory of their first kiss in the garden maze made her stomach tighten. She had been 18, rebellious, and captivated by his creative soul. Their secret meetings continued for months, hidden from her wealthy parents and the judgmental eyes of society. But that spring had changed everything. The consequences of their relationship had forced difficult choices, ones that still haunted her 15 years later. Claire's reverie broke when Andrew stepped onto the balcony. He carried 2 glasses of champagne, completely unaware of her momentary lapse into the past. "There you are," he said, handing her a glass. "The Peterson Group wants to fast-track our expansion into Europe. They're sending over some historical documentation about similar ventures tomorrow." While reviewing company documents the next day, Andrew noticed an unusual folder in their shared drive. It contained old scanned papers from Claire's family estate, including staff records from 2009. One name caught his attention: Jamal Richardson. The employment record showed he'd left abruptly, with no explanation given. A photo attached to the file showed a striking young man in his mid-20s, standing in the estate's garden. Andrew's interest grew when he noticed the file had been accessed recently. More curious still was a series of money transfers from Claire's personal account to an arts foundation in New York, starting shortly after their marriage. The foundation's director was listed as J. Richardson. The pieces didn't quite fit together, but Andrew felt an unfamiliar tension in his chest. Claire had never mentioned anyone named Jamal, despite claiming she remembered all their household staff from her youth. The regular financial transfers suggested an ongoing connection, one she'd never disclosed. As he stared at the screen, questions multiplied in his mind. Who was Jamal Richardson? Why had he left so suddenly? And most importantly, why was Claire still sending him money after all these years? These discoveries planted seeds of doubt in Andrew's mind, creating tiny fractures in the perfect image of their life together. The successful party from the previous night suddenly felt distant, overshadowed by the mystery emerging from these digital files. Andrew sat in his home office, staring at the financial records displayed on his screen. After a day of internal debate, he decided to confront Claire during dinner. The elegant dining room, usually a space for their shared achievements, now felt charged with unspoken tension. "I found something interesting in the company archives today," Andrew began, keeping his voice steady. "Records from your family's estate." A staff member named Jamal Richardson. He watched Claire's reaction carefully, noting how her hand tightened around her wine glass. The same Jamal Richardson who now runs an arts foundation that receives regular payments from your personal account. Claire's composed expression wavered for just a moment before she recovered. "He was our butler for a while. The payments are just charitable donations. I've always supported the arts." Her response came too quickly, too rehearsed. She stood up, clearing plates that weren't finished, avoiding eye contact. "Why didn't you ever mention him before?" Andrew pressed. "Especially since you're still in contact through these donations?" "It was a long time ago, Andrew. He was just another employee. There's nothing more to tell." Claire's voice carried a warning edge, suggesting the conversation should end there. But the next day, while Andrew attended board meetings, Claire drove to a small gallery in downtown Miami. Jamal's latest exhibition filled the space, abstract paintings capturing moments of passion and loss. He stood near the entrance, still handsome at 42, his artist persona a far cry from his days as a butler. "You shouldn't have come," Jamal said quietly when they were alone in his office. The space smelled of paint and coffee, walls covered with sketches and photographs. "Andrew's been asking questions." Claire paced the small room, her designer heels clicking against the concrete floor. "What am I supposed to do? Everything I've built with him is at risk. The company, our reputation, our life together." Her voice cracked slightly. "If he finds out about that summer..." "About us, you mean? Or about what happened after?" Jamal's tone carried years of suppressed emotion. "You made your choice, Claire. You chose your family's expectations over what we had." "I did what I had to do," Claire whispered, touching her wedding ring unconsciously. The donations were supposed to be the end of it, a clean break. Meanwhile, Andrew's investigation deepened. He contacted Robert Shun, a family friend who had worked with Claire's parents. Over lunch at an exclusive club, Robert revealed small details that didn't match Claire's stories about that period. "The summer of 2009 was complicated," Robert said carefully. "Claire disappeared for almost 2 months. Her parents said she was studying in Europe, but there were rumors." He paused, selecting his words. "The butler left around the same time. Quite suddenly, as I recall." Andrew's mind raced, connecting dots he hadn't seen before. Claire's occasional unexplained absences, her resistance to visiting her family's estate, her careful avoidance of certain topics from her past. The perfect image of their marriage began showing more cracks. He spent evenings reviewing old photographs and social media posts, looking for traces of Jamal and Claire's history. Everything from that summer had been carefully erased, but the gaps themselves told a story. A missing period in Claire's otherwise well-documented life. The investigation consumed Andrew's thoughts, affecting his work performance. During an important investor meeting, he found himself distracted by a painting on the wall, an abstract piece that he later discovered came from Jamal's gallery. Claire noticed the changes in Andrew. His late nights in the office, his distant behavior, the way he studied her when he thought she wasn't looking. She increased her donations to Jamal's foundation, hoping the money would maintain his silence. But as pressure mounted from both sides, she realized her carefully constructed world was beginning to unravel. The truth hovered between them like a shadow, growing larger with each passing day. Their conversations became superficial, focused on work and social obligations, avoiding anything that might lead back to the summer of 2009. But they both knew this fragile peace couldn't last much longer. Claire's Mercedes pulled into the parking lot of La Maison, an exclusive French restaurant where she and Vanessa had shared countless lunches over the years. Today, however, wasn't about maintaining social appearances. Claire found Vanessa already seated in their usual private corner, martini in hand. "Andrew knows something," Claire said without preamble, sinking into her chair. He found the financial records, the payments to Jamal's foundation. Her usual composure cracked, revealing the strain beneath. "I can't keep lying to him, Van. But I can't tell him the truth either." Vanessa set down her glass, her expression darkening at the mention of Jamal's name. Have you considered that maybe Andrew deserves to know? 15 years is a long time to carry a secret like this. She paused, choosing her next words carefully, especially a secret about his own. Don't, Claire cut her off sharply. We agreed never to talk about that. Her hands trembled as she reached for the water glass. Besides, you're hardly objective when it comes to Jamal. The tension between them thickened. Vanessa's own history with Jamal complicated everything. She'd been the gallery owner who'd given him his first show, who'd helped transform him from a butler into a respected artist. Their brief relationship had ended badly, leaving Vanessa with her own scars. You're right, Vanessa admitted. I'm not objective, but I'm also the only person who knows the whole truth. About you, about Jamal, about what really happened that summer. She leaned forward, lowering her voice. And now Jamal's back in Miami, making waves in the art world. Did you think he'd stay away forever? Across town, Jamal stood in his new gallery space, directing the installation of his latest exhibition. Success had changed him. Gone was the quiet butler in pressed uniforms. Now he wore designer clothes, moved in elite circles, commanded attention. But the paintings surrounding him told a different story. Scenes of hidden gardens, shadowed figures, secrets kept in darkness. His phone buzzed with a message from his agent. Another successful sale, another step toward establishing himself in Miami's competitive art scene. But money wasn't what drove him anymore. He opened his wallet, removing a worn photograph he'd carried for 15 years. A sonogram image, dated September 2009. Mr. Richardson? His assistant interrupted his thoughts. There's a call from the Sullivan Foundation. They want to discuss increasing their annual contribution. Jamal smiled grimly. Claire's latest attempt at keeping him quiet. But silence had lost its value. He'd built his career, established his reputation. Nothing could threaten him now. And somewhere out, there was a 14-year-old who deserved to know their father. He picked up his phone, scrolling through social media until he found what he wanted: photos from Ree. Since Sullivan Foundation events. In the background of one image, he spotted a familiar face. The boy had Claire's eyes, but his smile. The resemblance was undeniable. Back at La Maison, Vanessa watched Claire struggle with her mounting anxiety. As Claire's oldest friend, she'd witnessed every stage of this drama. The passionate summer romance, the pregnancy, the hurried cover-up orchestrated by Claire's parents. She'd helped Claire maintain the lie through her marriage to Andrew, through the creation of their perfect life. What if we got ahead of this? Vanessa suggested. Tell Andrew the truth before he discovers it himself. It will be better coming from you. Claire shook her head, panic rising in her eyes. You don't understand. It's not just about the affair or even about the baby. It's about who Jamal really is, about his connection to Andrew's family. If that comes out, she left the sentence unfinished, but Vanessa understood. The web of secrets stretched far beyond a simple affair between a wealthy young woman and her family's butler. It threatened to unravel not just Claire's marriage, but the foundations of two prominent Miami families. Andrew tracked down Jamal's gallery through Miami's art scene connections. The modern glass building stood in the design district, its windows displaying massive abstract canvases. Inside, the space hummed with quiet activity as staff prepared for an upcoming exhibition. He hadn't planned this confrontation, but seeing Jamal in person, the man from the old employment records now transformed into a successful artist, triggered something visceral. Jamal looked up from a conversation with his curator, recognition flickering across his face. Not surprised, Andrew noted, as if Jamal had been expecting this moment. Mr. Sullivan. Jamal greeted him with practiced ease. I wondered when you'd find your way here. He dismissed his staff with a subtle gesture, leaving them alone among the artwork. Would you like to discuss my latest collection? Or should we talk about what really brings you to my gallery? Andrew maintained his composure, though his hands clenched at his sides. Let's start with the money. 15 years of donations from my wife's personal account. That's quite a generous patron you have in Claire. The Sullivan Foundation has supported many artists, Jamal replied smoothly. Though I admit, Claire's particular interest in my work goes back many years. He moved toward his office, indicating Andrew should follow. Perhaps we should continue this conversation privately. The office reflected Jamal's success. Expensive furniture, awards on the walls, a view of downtown Miami. But Andrew's attention caught on a small framed photograph partially hidden behind a sculpture. He recognized the garden maze from Claire's family estate. "You were more than just their butler," Andrew stated flatly. It wasn't a question. What hold do you have over her? Why the continued payments after all these years? Jamal's practiced smile faded. "You think this is about blackmail? Money?" He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Ask your wife about the summer of 2009. Ask her where she really was when her parents told everyone she was studying in Europe." The conversation escalated quickly. Andrew's controlled facade cracked as Jamal revealed more details about his relationship with Claire. The secret meetings, the shared dreams, the plans they'd made before everything fell apart. "You have no right." Andrew's voice shook with anger. "Whatever happened back then, Claire chose me. We built a life together." "Did she choose you?" Jamal challenged, stepping closer. "Or did she choose what you represented? Security, social acceptance, her family's approval?" The tension in the room reached breaking point. Both men stood inches apart. Years of unspoken truths and suppressed emotions threatening to explode into violence. At that moment, Claire burst into the office, her face pale with panic. She'd received a warning text from one of Jamal's staff, but arrived too late to prevent the confrontation. The sight of her husband and former lover facing each other stopped her cold. "Andrew, please," she started, but the words died in her throat. The way both men looked at her, Andrew with hurt and betrayal, Jamal with a mixture of old pain and something else, something that looked dangerously like determination. "Tell him, Claire," Jamal said quietly. "Tell him everything. About us, about that summer, about why you really keep sending money to my foundation." Andrew turned to his wife, seeing her clearly for the first time in their marriage. "No more lies, Claire. I want the truth. All of it." The air in the office grew thick with tension. Outside, Miami sunshine painted everything in bright, unforgiving light. Inside, three people stood frozen in a moment 15 years in the making, each holding pieces of a truth that threatened to destroy everything they'd built. Claire stood between the two men, her carefully constructed world crumbling around her. "This isn't the place," she managed, trying to regain control of the situation. "Andrew, please, let's go home. We can talk about this privately." "Private conversations are what got us here," Andrew replied coldly. 15 years of secrets and lies. "I want answers, Claire. Right here, right now." The confrontation was interrupted by Vanessa's unexpected arrival. She burst into the office, out of breath, having rushed over after Claire's desperate phone call. The sight of all three of them together made her stop short, her own complicated history with Jamal adding another layer of tension to the already charged atmosphere. "Perfect timing," Jamal said, his voice laced with sarcasm. "Another keeper of Claire's secrets joins us." Vanessa's presence changed the dynamic instantly. She'd been more than just Claire's confidant. She'd been entangled in this web of deception from the beginning. But watching Andrew's pain, remembering her own heartbreak, something inside her snapped. "You want to talk about secrets, Jamal?" Vanessa's voice trembled with suppressed emotion. "Let's talk about how you manipulated all of us. How you used Claire's influence to launch your art career. How you convinced me to give you your first gallery showing while you were still seeing her." Andrew turned to Vanessa, confusion mixing with his anger. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that Jamal isn't the victim he pretends to be," Vanessa continued, years of hurt spilling out. "While he was having a secret romance with Claire, he was also pursuing me. I didn't know about them at the time. I thought," she paused, composing herself, "I thought what we had was real." Claire stared at her best friend in shock. "You never told me it went that far." "How could I?" Vanessa replied bitterly. "By the time I found out about you two, you were already dealing with other complications. I buried my feelings, helped you handle your situation, played my part in maintaining your perfect life." Andrew stood silent, processing this new information. His wife's affair was now complicated by his trusted friend's involvement. The betrayal felt deeper, more personal. These were the people he'd trusted most, and they'd all been living behind masks. All this time, he said quietly, looking at each of them. Every dinner party, every charity event, every casual conversation, it was all built on lies. Jamal watched the scene unfold with a strange mix of regret and determination. We all made choices back then, he said, some better than others. But the past has a way of demanding its due. The tension in the room reached a breaking point. Claire, caught between her husband's pain, her best friend's revelation, and her former lover's presence, felt her carefully maintained composure cracking. I never meant to hurt any of you, she whispered, but the words sounded hollow even to her own ears. Hurt? Andrew laughed bit. Early. Claire, you've been lying to me since the day we met. And you, he turned to Vanessa, my trusted friend. How many dinners did we share while you kept this secret? How many times did you look me in the eye knowing the truth? Vanessa flinched at his words. I did it to protect Claire. To protect all of us. Protect us from what? Andrew demanded. What could be so terrible that it justified 15 years of deception? The question hung in the air, heavy with implication. Claire exchanged a desperate look with Vanessa, while Jamal watched with growing intensity. The real truth, the one that could shatter everything, still remained unspoken. The tension in Jamal's office had reached a breaking point. Claire's perfectly manicured nails dug into her palms as she realized she couldn't contain the truth any longer. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the room, like physical manifestations of the secrets about to be revealed. I had a child, Claire finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. The words hung in the air, heavy and irreversible. Jamal and I, we had a son. Andrew stepped back as if physically struck. The color drained from his face as he processed this revelation. A child? His voice cracked. You have a child I didn't know about? Claire's composure finally broke. I was 18, Andrew. My parents, they helped me handle everything quietly. The pregnancy, the birth, they arranged for him to be adopted by a trusted family. No one outside our immediate circle knew. Arranged? Jamal's voice carried a dangerous edge. You mean they forced you to give up our son? They threatened to ruin my life, to destroy any chance I had at a career if I tried to claim him. Andrew moved toward the office door, his movements mechanical. I need time to think. His whole world had shifted on its axis. Not just the affair, not just the lies, but a child, a living, breathing consequence of Claire's past. Andrew, please. Claire reached for him, but he pulled away. Don't, he said, his voice cold. 15 years of marriage, Claire. We talked about having children. We went through fertility treatments. All while you had a son out there somewhere? He grabbed his coat. I'm going to the lake house. Don't follow me. Don't call. I need to process this. After Andrew left, the office fell into heavy silence. Claire collapsed into a chair, while Vanessa stood awkwardly between her and Jamal. The truth was out, but it wasn't the whole truth. Not yet. He deserves to know everything, Jamal said quietly. About the adoption, about who took him in. No, Claire's head snapped up. That part stays buried. It would destroy too many lives. Later that evening, Jamal sat alone in his studio apartment above the gallery. He pulled out an old shoebox filled with memories, photographs, letters, and a single hospital bracelet labeled Baby Boy Sullivan. He'd never stopped thinking about his son, never stopped keeping tabs on him from a distance. His phone buzzed, a text from Claire. Please don't tell him anything else. I'm begging you. Meanwhile, Andrew drove aimlessly through Miami streets before ending up at the lake house, their weekend retreat where they'd spent so many happy moments. Now those memories felt tainted, unreal. He poured himself a scotch and stared at old photos on his phone. Claire's smile, their vacations, their perfectly curated life together. All of it built on a foundation of lies. Back in the city, Claire returned home to their empty penthouse. The silence was deafening. She walked to their home office and opened a hidden safe behind a painting. Inside lay a single envelope, yellowed with age, containing adoption papers and a photograph of a newborn baby. The child she'd given up, the secret she'd carried for 15 years. Her phone rang Jamal again. She let it go to voicemail, knowing what he wanted. He'd been patient for 15 years, watching their son grow up from a dista. NCE. But now he wanted more. He wanted acknowledgement, connection, the chance to be a father. The truth about the adoption would change everything. Not just her marriage to Andrew, but the careful arrangements that had kept their Miami social circle intact for over a decade. The child hadn't gone to strangers. He'd been adopted within their extended family, growing up right under their noses, protected by layers of legal documents and sworn secrets. Claire spent the night pacing her penthouse, her phone alternating between calls from Vanessa and messages from Jamal. The morning light found her still awake, staring at old photos on her laptop, encrypted files she kept hidden from everyone. Pictures of a baby she'd held for only 2 hours before he was taken away. Her son was now 14, though she hadn't dared to speak that number aloud in years. She knew where he was, had watched him grow up at family functions, pretending to be just another distant relative. The resemblance to Jamal grew stronger each year, making her heart stop every time someone commented on his artistic talent. Meanwhile, Andrew sat on the lake house deck, his third cup of coffee growing cold. The sun rose over the water, but he barely noticed. His mind kept returning to all the moments that now felt like lies. Their fertility treatments, their discussions about adoption, Claire's convenient explanations for avoiding certain family gatherings. He pulled out his phone and started researching. Miami adoption records from 2009. Private arrangements. Legal documents. His background in corporate law gave him an advantage. He knew where to look, what questions to ask. Something about the timing nagged at him. His own family had experienced changes that year too, though he'd never connected the dots before. Across town, Jamal worked furiously in his studio, channeling his emotions into a new series of paintings. Dark, turbulent canvases that spoke of loss and hidden truths. His gallery assistant found him there in the morning, surrounded by finished works that would shock his usual collectors. Gone were the safe, decorative pieces that sold to hotels and corporate offices. "Cancel my meetings," he instructed, "and give me everything you can find about the Sullivan family's private foundations from 2009 to present. Focus on any programs involving youth or education." Vanessa arrived at his studio unannounced, her face showing signs of a sleepless night. "What are you planning, Jamal?" she demanded. "Haven't you caused enough damage?" Damage. He turned from his canvas, paint streaking his expensive shirt. "I'm trying to claim what's mine. What was taken from me? You of all people should understand. Wasn't your own gallery stolen by your family when they found out about us?" "That was different," she said, but her voice wavered. "We're talking about a child now. A teenage boy who has no idea his whole life is built on lies." "Like your life," he challenged. "Living as Claire's best friend while hiding your own scars? How long have you watched our son grow up, pretending not to care?" Vanessa flinched. Someone had to be strong, had to help maintain the story while you ran away to New York to build your career. "I didn't run away," Jamal's voice rose. "I was forced out. Your precious social circle made it very clear what would happen if I stayed." Back at the penthouse, Claire finally answered one of Jamal's messages. "Meet me at the Botanical Gardens. 3 p.m. Alone." The gardens had been their meeting place years ago, when she was a teenager sneaking away from her family's expectations. Now, as she waited by the same fountain, everything felt different. She wasn't that naive girl anymore, and he wasn't the passionate young butler who'd captured her heart. She pulled out her phone, opening a hidden folder of photos. Her son at various ages, birthday parties, school events, family gatherings. Always in the background, always careful not to focus too long on age. I'm 14 years of loving him from a distance, watching another woman raise him, maintaining the elaborate fiction that protected everyone's reputations. But now, as her marriage crumbled and Jamal threatened to expose everything, she faced an impossible choice. Continue protecting the careful lies that had shaped their social world, or risk destroying multiple families by revealing the truth about her son's adoption. Jamal arrived at the Botanical Gardens ahead of schedule, finding a secluded bench near the fountain. He carried a leather portfolio containing documents he'd gathered over the years. Birth records, legal papers, and most importantly, proof of his son's current whereabouts. When Claire appeared, her usual polished appearance showed signs of strain. "I know what you're going to say," she began, but Jamal cut her off. I've been patient, Claire. 15 years of watching my son grow up through social media posts and charity event photos. Getting updates about his life through gallery gossip and society columns. He opened the portfolio. Did you know he won first place in the state art competition last month? He is my talent. Claire's hands trembled. Of course I know. I've tracked every achievement, every milestone. But we had an agreement. The adoption arrangement was forced on us by your parents and their social circle. Jamal interrupted. I was young, broke, and threatened with legal action if I tried to claim him. But I'm not that person anymore. I have resources now, influence. I want to be part of his life. You don't understand what you're asking, Claire whispered. The family that adopted him, they're not just some random couple. If the truth comes out, it won't just affect us. Jamal leaned forward, his voice intense. I know exactly who adopted him, Claire. Your cousin Elizabeth and her husband James. Pillars of Miami society, major donors to the arts, and coincidentally, frequent buyers of my work through various foundations. Claire's face went pale. How long have you known? I figured it out years ago. The timing of their sudden adoption announcement. The way they've carefully cultivated connections to the art world, making sure I saw photos of him growing up without being too obvious. He pulled out a recent photo. He has your eyes, but everything else, his creativity, his passion for art, that's from me. Back at the lake house, Andrew was piecing together his own investigation. His law firm's resources gave him access to records that started painting a disturbing picture. Elizabeth and James had filed adoption papers the same month Claire had supposedly been in Europe. The coincidence seemed less random with each document he uncovered. His phone rang, Elizabeth calling. He let it go to voicemail, not ready to confront what he was beginning to suspect. The message she left was tense. Andrew, we need to talk. It's about Claire and some other matters that might affect the family. At the gardens, Claire finally broke down. What do you want, Jamal? Money? Public acknowledgement? I want to tell him the truth, Jamal replied simply. Before he finds out some other way. He's old enough to understand now. And destroy his relationship with Elizabeth and James? They're the only parents he's ever known. Claire's voice rose with panic. This isn't just about us anymore. Think about what this would do to him. I have thought about it every day for 14 years. Jamal's tone hardened. I'm giving you 1 week to decide how we handle this. After that, I'm going to reach out to him directly. He deserves to know his real parents. You can't, Claire pleaded. The legal agreements mean nothing compared to a father's right to know his son, Jamal finished. 1 week, Claire. That's all the time you have to figure out how to tell him yourself. After that, I take matters into my own hands. As he walked away, Claire sank onto the bench, her world spinning out of control. Her phone buzzed with a message from Elizabeth. We need to talk. Andrew's been asking questions about 2009. The carefully constructed web of lies was unraveling faster than she could repair it, threatening to expose not just her past with Jamal, but the elaborate conspiracy that had kept their son's true parentage hidden for so long. Vanessa found Claire sitting in her parked car outside Elizabeth's mansion, gripping the steering wheel but unable to move. Without a word, she slipped into the passenger seat. You can't keep avoiding this, Vanessa said quietly. Elizabeth called me. She's panicking because Andrew's been requesting access to old family trust documents. Claire stared at the imposing house where her son had grown up. I've watched him from a distance for so long, man. Every time I visit, every holiday gathering, I have to pretend he's just my cousin's child. Do you know how many times he's asked me to help with his art projects, never knowing I'm his mother? And now Jamal wants to tell him everything, Vanessa added. She hesitated before continuing. There's something else you need to know. Something I've kept secret even from you. Claire turned to her friend, seeing the weight of confession in her eyes. The night you told me you were pregnant, Vanessa began, I was going to tell you about my relationship with Jamal. But I also had news about Andrew's family that would have changed everything. Andrew's father. He had another son, from before his marriage. Claire's breath caught. What are you saying? Jamal isn't just your former lover, Claire. He's Andrew's half-brother. That's why your parents were so adamant about keeping everything quiet. It wasn't just about the scandal of you and the butler. It was about preventing anyone from discovering the connection between Miami's most prominent families. The revelation hit Claire like a physical blow. Her son wasn't just the product of a forbidden romance. He was the bridge between two family dynasties, neither of which had acknowledged the connection. Meanwhile, Andrew sat in his law firm's private archives, staring at a yellowed envelope. Inside were letters from his father to Jamal's mother, along with financial records of quiet support payments that had stopped abruptly in 2009, the same year Claire had disappeared to Europe. His phone lit up with a message from Jamal. "We need to talk. Not about Claire, about our father." Across town, Elizabeth paced her study, surrounded by paperwork from the adoption. Her teenage son, Claire's child, she corrected herself, was at art practice, blissfully unaware of the storm gathering around him. She picked up a photo from her desk, the boy at age 7, painting in their garden. Even then, his talent had been obvious, a gift from the father he'd never known. A knock at her door made her jump. James, her husband, entered with a grave expression. "Andrew's requesting a meeting. All of us, you, me, Claire, and Jamal." He paused. "He knows Elizabeth. Somehow he's figured it out." The pieces were falling into place, revealing a picture more complex than anyone had imagined. The affair between Claire and Jamal wasn't just a scandal to be buried. It was part of a larger pattern of secrets that had shaped their entire social circle. Back in her car, Claire finally found her voice. "Does Jamal know about his connection to Andrew?" "I don't think so," Vanessa replied. "But he's about to find out." Andrew's called a family meeting for tomorrow. Everyone who was involved in the decisions made in 2009. Claire's phone buzzed with Andrew's message. "I know everything. About Jamal being my brother. About our son. No more lies, Claire. It's time we all face the truth." She looked up at Elizabeth's house again, knowing her son was inside, probably working on his latest art piece, unaware that his whole world was about to change. The truth would redefine not just his identity, but the very meaning of family in their intertwined life. The Sullivan family estate's grand dining room had never felt more suffocating. Andrew sat at the head of the table, his father's traditional place, a detail that now carried new weight. Around him gathered the architects of 15 years of deception: Claire, Jamal, Elizabeth and James, Vanessa, and his own mother, Margaret Sullivan, who'd flown in from Paris upon hearing about the meeting. "Before we begin," Andrew said, his voice steady despite his inner turmoil, "I want everyone to understand something. What we discuss here changes everything. Not just for us, but for a 14-year-old boy who deserves to know the truth about who he is." He placed a DNA test result on the table. "This confirms what I suspected. Jamal and I share a father." The room tensed as he continued, "Which means my nephew, the boy I've known as Elizabeth's son, is not just Claire's child with Jamal. He's my blood relative twice over. My brother's son. My wife's child." Margaret Sullivan's hands trembled as she reached for her water glass. "Your father never wanted this to come out. He provided for Jamal's mother until I became inconvenient," Jamal interrupted. "Until Claire became pregnant with my child. And suddenly the connections between our families became too dangerous to acknowledge." Claire stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "He's at art practice right now, working on a piece for the spring showcase. In an hour, he'll come home to a family that's about to implode because we all thought we knew better than to tell him the truth." Elizabeth, who had raised the boy as her own, finally spoke. "We gave him a stable home, love, opportunities. Everything we did was to protect him." "Protect him?" Jamal's laugh was bitter. "You mean protect your reputations. The Sullivan name. The careful fiction that Miami's elite lives by different rules." Andrew raised his hand for silence. "What matters now is how we move forward. Because in 30 minutes, my brother's son, my wife's child, will walk through that door. And he deserves to know exactly who he is and where he comes from." As if on cue, they heard a car pulling up the driveway. Claire moved to the window, watching their son, grab his art portfolio from the back seat. He was tall for 14, with Jamal's artistic grace and her own determined expression. "He already suspects something," Elizabeth admitted quietly. "Last week, he asked me why he looks so much like the artist whose work hangs in our gallery. Why is Claire's eyes?" The front door opened. Footsteps in the hallway. The dining room door swung open, and there he stood, a teenager on the cusp of understanding his own story, looking confused at the gathering of adults who had shaped his life from the shadows. "Mom," he said to Elizabeth. Then his gaze swept the room, lingering on Claire, on Jamal, on Andrew. "What's going on?" Claire stepped forward, tears in her eyes. "Sweetie, we need to tell you a story. It's about family, about choices we made before you were born, and about who you really are." Jamal moved to stand beside her, and for the first time in 14 years, they faced their son together. Andrew watched from his position at the head of the table, seeing his brother, his wife, and his nephew as family for the first time. The boy looked around the room again, his artist's eye taking in the details, the tension in the adults' faces, the way they positioned themselves, the undercurrent of secrets about to break surface. "This is about why I can paint like Mr. Richardson, isn't it? And why Aunt Claire always looks at me like she's seeing a ghost." The truth spilled out then, not in the careful way they'd planned, but in honest, messy waves. About young love and family pressure. About brothers who never knew they were brothers. About parents who gave up their child to protect him from scandal. And about the web of lies that had finally, inevitably, come undone. As the story unfolded, the boy's world shifted and expanded. He gained two sets of parents, an uncle who was also his stepfather, and a heritage rich with both art and complexity. The perfect facades of Miami's elite families cracked open to reveal the messy, beautiful truth of real human connections. And in that moment of revelation, they all understood that family, real family, was something far more complicated and precious than any of them had imagined.